I'm never prepared for these things.
No, nobody is.
Never. I mean, I'm prepared for the intrusion types, but not for the like off the top of the cuff intros. I'm never.
I try it every time, and one day we're just gonna go through with it. I couldn't hold the last one though. I really couldn't, because I was going strong, and I bursted out laughing in the middle of it.
I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Tech Tips. My name is Sean Roop.
And I'm Chris Tripp, and we're with neoRhino IT Solutions. And today, we're going over...
intrusion types.
Woo! Yes.
More importantly, the top 10 most common intrusion types that we typically see.
Yes. So I guess to start things off, we're going to go with the password-based or brute force attack. So basically, this intrusion type is basically somebody manually trying to get into your system. Now, there are softwares that allow you to do it, but basically, they get a username and they're trying to just ping passwords until one works. And then that's what's really just known as a brute force attack. This can be an easy task for those who don't have secure passwords, and it's the reason why secure passwords are becoming more and more secure and more lengthy and have more requirements is because it's becoming easier and easier for hackers to actually crack the password, crack the code, and get into your system. So essentially, this is practically the number one reason why you want a secure password is so nobody else can just guess it. But other than that, that's pretty much the essence of a brute force or a password-based attack. It is repetitive attempts that are made to duplicate a valid login or password. So what's our number two, Sean?
So number two is eavesdropping and social engineering. So basically, information, people will try to go and gather information on your company, email addresses, employee names, phone numbers, and many other pieces of information like that to try to use that to gain access or
gather information or enough information to gain access.
Or at least determine the structure of your business so that it can be easier for them to then attempt to attack.
That's why there's more and more of those like CEOs requesting for, hey, can you get a bunch of gift cards for Apple?
Absolutely.
Like, that's not a request that would even come from that guy.
But so some of the more common versions of eavesdropping, social engineering, phishing, which we have done a whole previous topic on.
Definitely check out that video.
Yeah, absolutely. Baiting, which is very similar to phishing, but usually it's with a trade of goods.
So typically, they offer you something.
Yeah, they'll offer you something in return. More like almost like a bribe.
Yeah.
Quid pro quo. Once again, similar situation, except it's more of a service, in exchange for a service. Pretexting is another form of social engineering. They usually will try to set up a good pretext or fabricated scenario, and then they'll try to steal people's personal information from that.
I've seen a lot of those recently come up. So basically, we normally receive the regular spam email like, hey, the CEO is asking for Amazon gift cards to be purchased or something like that. But I have been starting to see a bunch of reports from users come in where there's like a pre-made conversation, and it's like you were a part of it, but it's some conversation you were having back like 2016 or something along those lines. But looking at it, you're like, oh, hey, I'm gonna respond to this. It looks like I was already in communications with this person, and then you reply to them, and that person now has a piece of your information to. Then social engineering has worked.
Right.
I guess.
So, and then one other that we just want to briefly touch on, tailgating. That's more of a physical security side. So basically, it's just trying to follow someone in after they've used a security card on a secure door somewhere, something like that. So just trying to gain access to a secure location after someone has already gained access to it.
They're usually the Mr. Nice guys, like, oh, let me get that door for you.
Let
me help you out. Oh,
I've got this delivery.
There's a lot of cases where delivery people will go in, and that's like the number one thing that can get through your security gate. Like that's your number one perimeter, but delivery people get allowed in because they have to drop off packages. And then once they're in, it's just like any old Hollywood movie.
Yep. So some of the ways that you can prevent this from happening, right? Obviously, don't open any emails from unknown sources. Don't give offers from strangers the benefit of the doubt. Don't Just if you don't know, if it seems too good to be true, just
probably not.
Yeah, it's probably not, or at least verify
yes.
if you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we always say that, but it's never a bad thing to go to your CEO and say, hey, is this really?
Yeah, no, it's definitely acceptable. Your CEO would probably actually appreciate it if you shot that email over to them and said, hey, are you really requesting this? And like in a new email chain though, don't reply to that one. Don't forward it. Just say, hey, I got a request for this. Are you sure this is what you want? And then they'll respond, usually, hopefully in a timely manner, saying, no, that's not at all. I didn't even email that.
Right.
And in most cases, their email address has been spoofed in a way. Normally the name, and it's just like a random Gmail account from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So it's definitely one of those things that's out there, and it is a heavy hitter on us. We get all those calls all day long.
Yeah, definitely.
It's repetitive.
Yeah, they'll forward us over emails all the time to just verify and make sure that they're.
Is this spam? Well, it has this link to a PDF document that leads you to the web internet. No.
So some other common ways to prevent these types of attacks from happening. Lock your workstations when you're away from them.
Definitely.
Make sure you have antivirus installed on all your workstations, that it's up to date and running properly.
Yep.
And then make sure to understand your company's privacy policy and what circumstances you can or should let a stranger into a building or things like that.
Right.
If they've got to sign in, if you've got to have guest sign-ins or things like that, make sure you're following those protocols. So. All right, so with that, what is our next intrusion type?
Our number 3 intrusion type is going to be identity spoofing. So essentially, this is not with your personal identity per se. This is more along the lines of your IP address, your host name, your network domain name. Pretty much all those things can be spoofed in a way. So essentially, you can get an email that looks like it's from your CEO. Let's just stay with that subject because we're already on it.
Absolutely.
But essentially, it looks like it's from their email address and it has their name on it.
Yeah.
But it's not something at all that you would essentially want to reply to in the sense of same mentality as you get those Amazon gift cards or something like that request. So essentially, I'm just going to read this off. So. Identity spoofing is where a hacker will modify the IP address to match a valid IP address on your network subnet. That also includes the host names or the domain names. In a basic sense, if the device connects to your network with this valid IP address, or as if it's a host or a legitimate computer, they can essentially in turn have access to the network and be able to browse through file systems and structures, as long as hopefully you have some password protected file system. But if you don't, and that computer's allowed on the network, then you've essentially opened yourself up to be able to have your files accessed by someone who can in turn to that maliciously destroy them, encrypt them, and then provide, install ransomware on the machines. Pretty much gives them access to whatever they want, depending on how far they've gone or which device they've spoofed.
Absolutely. One thing to take away from that, is that even though you may recognize the name of an email address, you may recognize someone's computer name, things like that. Always verify that. If it seems off, the name may be the exact same domain name, the exact same email address. Those can be easily spoofed.
Yes.
So you always want to verify if it seems off or fishy to you. So. But yeah, so with that, our next intrusion type, I'm sorry, were you?
No, we're
okay. Yeah.
A-okay.
Our next intrusion type is a compromised key attack.
Yes,
right,
sir.
so we'll start off easily. What is a key? So in basic terms, a key is a code used by computers to interpret secured data. In the case of encryption, keys are used to encrypt and decrypt data. Keys like this are also used when logging into machines, as well as websites to ensure credentials are securely sent over the network internet.
And so basically this is like a key in the background, right?
Yeah, right.
This isn't a key that you normally type in. It's whenever you type in your password, your computer encrypts that key or your password with a key and sends it across to the server to authenticate. The server then decrypts, right?
Hopefully, it's set up that way to do that. Yeah,
that's true. That's very true.
But yeah, in most cases, it's mainly used for encryption, decryption of secured data.
Definitely.
And that can be used in many different sources. And emails can be encrypted, decrypted, and that there's a key attached to that as well. So anytime you're looking at securely sending information, you're going to have a key attached to it. So
right. So I guess in that sense, we know what a key is. What is a compromised key then?
So essentially a compromised key is really easy. It's whenever a valid key is obtained by someone that has malicious intent, essentially, or by a hacker. It's considered to be a compromised key at that point, because then now they have access to be able to encrypt, decrypt, or use that key to securely access what you would have access to normally.
Or even create more keys.
Or create more keys, depending on what, if it has access to be able to do that. Yes,
definitely, yeah.
But yeah, that's the worst case scenario there, is that they can use that to generate more keys and then access more and more information, do more malicious things.
Definitely.
But yeah. So all right, Chris, what's our next? What's our number 5?
Number 5 is going to be man-in-the-middle attack. So basically, this is whenever a attacker discreetly relays or alters data while two parties are communicating with each other. This usually happens while the individuals are under the assumption that they are only communicating amongst themselves, even though there's someone in the middle listening and changing the information being shared. They could also gain important information from this tactic. Normally, there's not a normal case scenario, but in cases that I've seen, someone will place a computer or a router in the middle of your network designed to essentially forward the information out of their network into that person's computer. They manipulate it and then send it across, and the person on the receiving end doesn't even know it happened. But essentially, y'all could be sending, financial information, personal information, PHI even. Essentially, all that information, if it's not encrypted well enough, this man-in-the-middle attack could be detrimental to your company.
Because, absolutely.
I mean, even the simple task of sending over a password via email, in plain text, that's absolutely and totally forbidden in the IT world, hopefully. But essentially, if you send something like that, a hacker could get a hold of it, log into the account before the actual user does, and then have access to that. And if that happens to be an admin account, you've just opened the whole network up to that hacker to change the passwords on everything that you thought you had access to, and just pretty much do what they want with your network.
Yeah, most commonly it'll happen usually within a wireless network. It's a lot easier for someone to just sit down with a scanner, right, fly into network, and if you're able to get into that network, you're then able to sniff all the packets that are crossing your path here, and then you can
even on Wireshark, you can go to Starbucks and log into the Wi-Fi and just scan the whole.
Especially something as easy as an unsecured network like that. So that's why they always say, to be cautious when you're doing anything on an unsecured network like that. But for those that do that very often, you want to make sure that you're using some form of secured communications at that point.
Like a VPN connection. So whenever you connect to public Wi-Fi's, definitely connect to a VPN if you're going to start doing anything that has confidential information or just anything you want secured. And in my mentality, I think everything needs to be secured. But
it definitely just at least make sure you're not passing along any sensitive information, credit card numbers, social security numbers, anything like that over a public network. It's going to cut down on those types of situations.
For sure.
So our number 6 for intrusion types is going to be denial of service attacks. So basically, denial of service is someone that's maliciously flooding a network or a machine with packets until it gets to the point where it can no longer sustain that flow and begins to crash or fail. So
there's all kinds of those.
There's all kinds of them, and so basically you can use it to block traffic down on a particular network or on a machine or even to a particular user. You can send invalid data to applications or network services, causing unexpected behavior for those services. Flood an entire network or a single computer with traffic until an overload happens and it causes it to crash or blue screen. You can even randomize. So a lot of times people will use it to kind of like scramble an IT team, right? So if they're hitting a network with a denial of service and it's starting to shut down machines or starting to shut down network equipment, it's going to scramble your IT to start working on that, and they're gonna be focusing on this attack over here, and they're not seeing someone trying the major attack there. Someone's trying to get in the background while IT is distracted with resolving this issue.
Now, this will usually be the aftermath of social engineering or eavesdropping. They have enough information about your company to know what to attack specifically, and then go and attack what they want to attack so that you can actually pull away the attention. it's pretty intense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple of different types of denial of service attacks. So the most common, obviously, being the DDoS, the distributed denial of services. And essentially, it's there'll be malicious software that are loaded on multiple users' machines, and it's not even necessarily within your own network, but just around the globe, that are all tied together into what they call a botnet, right? Which is then used, resources from those machines are used to then attack a single point, so that all these machines are now flooding one particular, computer, one IP address or a network, until it begins to fail. But it can be, this kind of attack can be hard to pinpoint, right? Because it's coming from multiple different sources, and those sources don't have really anything to do with who is attacking you, right? Because it's someone else's machine that they're using to get through that. So, another type is application layer attack, where a web service typically is targeted, so like a website, or really a lot of times you see it in like
or
banking.
A
function within a website.
So essentially what can happen in that situation is one piece of your website goes down, whether you're on a banking facility or not. So now you've gotten the IT department involved in trying to figure out what's wrong with the website. Before they even get a chance to find out what's going on with the website, they're looking in the wrong direction for what's happening. And so what can happen is the IT department's focused on fixing the website. Maybe they're getting with the web developers, and on the back end, the hackers got enough information, and he's just hopping into your servers or just trying the same thing on your servers, and pretty much pulling away the attention from that IT department again, which is probably one of the worst things that could happen. Is your IT doesn't know it's happening behind their backs. But other than that, there are other ways of doing it. So there's the advanced persistent denial of service attack. So essentially that's along the same lines as the distributed denial of service attacks, except for it's for an extended amount of time. And the reason or the way they're able to do it is the same exact way as the distributed DOS. So this is just a subtype of denial of service. So in essence of overloading a system or network is happening here. However, the difference with this type of attack is an attacker will strategically change its target to avoid defensive DDoS countermeasures like IPS and IDS systems. So essentially what they're doing is changing who they're attacking repetitively to elongate that time that they get to attack, because they're not focusing on one system. And then again, same concept, your IT department gets distracted looking at this computer, it starts working fine, but 3 other computers behind you start going out, and you're like, oh, hold on, wait, what's happening? So that's pretty intense.
Definitely, and so just IPS, IDS, we'll get into that a little bit later, but it's intrusion prevention and intrusion detection systems that we'll talk about a little bit later. But specifically with this advanced persistent denial of service, the largest attack that has been recorded, I believe, was 38 days, involving more than 50 plus petabits of information.
Now, a petabit is quite a bit of information. Are you able to put that in perspective, maybe in gigs or megs?
So it equals to about 53.7 megabits of information. So imagine moving 50,000 terabytes or 50 million gigabits worth of information across the network over a course of a month. That's a gigantic amount of traffic.
I would say, I think most home users maybe have a limit of 100 to 300 gigs.
I would say around that.
You're throwing literally exponential amounts of numbers through your network. Your devices would not be able to withstand the attack, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So another type of denial of service is denial of service as a service. So this is a more meta version of denial of service, right? But it's essentially you'll be able to go and certain websites will sell a booster or stressor services that in reality are like packaged denial of service softwares that you can then, as a user that may not be as educated as some of the more advanced hackers out there, can still use to target like a home network or a smaller business's network and still take them down with this piece of software. So a couple ways to prevent these kinds of attacks from happening, right? So there's preemptive measures that can be taken to avoid full-fledged denial of service attacks. However, due to the amount of different types of flooding attacks, avoiding all factors to a point of preventing the attack is not currently possible. Right? It's difficult to really pinpoint everything that can be possibly done.
Well, plus all the new stuff.
Yeah, and every day
out
something
there just
new.
Made someone new that's about to hit someone's machine,
and
it
no
could be
one's
the
going to
next
have.
big thing.
Yeah, and once again, we'll get into once we start talking about IPS and IDS. There are ways to cut down on a large portion of it, and to even prevent some brand new things. But it's nothing is. Like we always say, nothing is 100%.
Yeah, especially
right? You're
not
never 100% safe.
Like people will find a problem with the chip on your memory slot.
Yeah, and all of a sudden,
there you go.
Yep, it's down, and you're not doing anything for that day. So, some of the ways you can avoid or prevent this from happening, right? Using SYN cookies on security devices. It's a well-known countermeasure against having a network flooded with traffic is to use SYN cookies. Using them on security devices like IDSs and IPSs at the network edge is an efficient way to track incoming connections, lowering the chance of SYN flooding intended to overwhelm your network. You can set up one or more reverse proxies, which essentially will set up a bubble for incoming traffic that will then get essentially stuck in that bubble unless it's or before it gets the actual web servers and things like that.
Yeah.
As well as last ditch effort is setting up a null route with your ISP, essentially dropping cutting service. It drops all packets before it gets to you. That way, it then stops the denial of service from happening.
It allows you to at least remediate or just change IP addresses, host names, whatever is needed to get back up and running, and then you call your ISP and say, hey, we're good to go. Go ahead and flip the switch.
Yeah.
And you just hope it doesn't all start crashing down again.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's definitely a scary thing for a business to have happen. It's not their internet service provider's fault. It's someone attacking you.
Yeah.
That's why you can't get to the internet.
So our seventh type of denial of service, intrusion. Sorry.
So that's it for denial of service.
That's it for denial of service, yes.
That's just the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. There's so much more to that, but we didn't want to keep you here all day.
Right.
So our next intrusion type, number 7, right, is asymmetrical routing.
Yes, sir.
Right. So basically, it's asymmetrical routing is it basically routes in one direction through one path and routes out through a separate path, allowing you to bypass certain pieces of equipment on your network that could potentially stop that malicious activity from occurring, essentially.
Yes, and so essentially with that asymmetric routing set in place, the attacker is able to come in from one direction, and that information is going to come out another direction, so it's a lot more difficult to figure out where it's coming from, because it doesn't just go right back to that person's initial location. It goes into your network and then out a whole nother direction. So it's definitely something that it's dangerous, but it is something that can be set up on your firewalls or IDSs and IPSs. But essentially, if you want to prevent this type of intrusion from happening, just don't set up asymmetric routing.
Just disable it on your devices.
Exactly.
It's pretty easy.
It's a checkbox.
Yeah. So, unless it's absolutely necessary for you to have in your network, and in some cases it is required, because if you've got a high availability network or mesh setup, right, then you're going to need that enabled to be able to
if you've got
execute.
A flat network,
if you've got a flat, simple network, you don't really. I mean, if you've got a flat, simple network, there's only really one route for you to be taking, anyways.
Exactly.
But
so other than that,
So our eighth intrusion type that we have here is a buffer overflow attack. So you want to go into?
I'll go over what it is. So a buffer overflow attack is specific when specific sections of a computer's memory within a network are overwritten. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. They can find that little loophole inside your memory chip, and they're able to get through. So it overwrites the data with the memory, usually containing a set of commands which will execute later when it's time to attack. This will usually result in a denial of service situation, but can also turn into a way for attackers to gain remote access to the network, sort of like a backdoor into systems and networks. So
it's basically hackers and people looking to do malicious things preying on system vulnerabilities, essentially.
Exactly. And like, not just your software has vulnerabilities. Like, your updates on your software are important, of course, but there's also firmware updates for your hardware to prevent these things from happening. And then sometimes there's even actual physical issues with the device itself that cannot be remediated with firmware, and it would be best to replace them as long as if that's found by your vendor per se. So there are definitely some caveats when running in the technological world, but we all love it so much.
Right.
So we're not moving away from it. But other than knowing what it is, how can you prevent it? You can make it harder for an attacker to achieve this by installing boundary checking logic that's able to identify URL strings or executable code that can be written, or by keeping your network's buffer size relatively small so there isn't enough space for the malicious content to be injected. So I guess this is pretty much saying that there are multiple pieces that can be intruded on, I guess, that have flaws.
Right.
And so not just your memory, but just pretty much any piece of hardware can have this happen. And if they are able to get their code injected into that little area that's able to hold it, they're able to run that code and either access your system or tell your system to go hit another person's network with their DDoS attack, and you're just a part of the large situation of the buffer overflow attack, per se. So basically, they'll put that software in your hardware and be able to access it and use it.
Right.
So other than that, we have our number 9 intrusion type.
So it's protocol-specific attacks, right? So essentially, protocol-specific attacks occur whenever an attacker accesses the network through openings in the network using allowed protocols, so TCP, UDP, ARPs, IP, et cetera. Attackers are able to do this by using malformed messages or by spoofing the open protocol with the incorrect syntax, otherwise known as protocol impression. So essentially, it makes it seem like they're coming in on a port with
access to the system.
With access to the system as a known good. Service, and then they're able, and then once they're able to bypass that port prevention or that port, once they're able to bypass the firewall, essentially, then they're able to get into your system and proceed to
so I guess
attack from there.
To prevent that, since it does deal with your firewall, how do you kind of prevent it? It doesn't sound like you can fully prevent this one.
That can be difficult. Obviously you want to lock down ports that aren't in use if they're not needed. But I mean, obviously, not everything can be locked down. Sometimes you'll need things open,
like HTTPS. Port 443. That's the #1 used port to access the internet. So you can't lock that down. And it's going to be the #1 way they can get in.
Absolutely. So just the key is to remember that not everything is foolproof. And that if an attacker is persistent enough and knows what they're looking for, it's only a matter of time before they gain access to the system they're trying to infiltrate. So just being knowledgeable of those types of things. And once again, we'll get into a good way of determining if someone is trying to access your system via a protocol-specific attack a little bit later once we start talking about the intrusion detections.
The devices that we can put in, or device or software.
The device or software that we can put on the networks to verify. So, so the last one we have on our list for intrusion.
It's malware. It's malware. Don't download it. It's dangerous. It's the reason why DDoS attacks happen. It's the reason why your computer's running slow. It's just a very malicious thing, and that's what the mal in malware stands for. It's malicious software. So essentially, malware intrusions happen when malware is installed or injected onto a machine on the network. So essentially, you go to a website, a script can run and download malware. You go to buy something online, and you hit the pay now, you could technically download malware. So essentially, there are multitudes of ways. You could give someone a USB, or someone could give you a USB saying, hey, look at this document for me. And as soon as you plug it in, all of a sudden, you've got malware. So just be cautious about what you're downloading, what links you're going to, who you trade off information with. Pretty much the types of malware that mainly cause people to get intruded or have intrusion in the background of the mind of the hacker is going to be your Trojans, your viruses, your worms, your bots, and for ransomware. Essentially, those are a very small list of what could be there, but those are just types of malware that can be used to intrude on your system.
Some of the more common ones that we
every single one that I think I've ever cleaned up off of any infected computer.
And so a good way to prevent that, obviously, have a good antivirus installed, an up-to-date or anti-malware program, or a combination of the two, or have a next-gen AV, which is going to give you even more, it's another line of defense essentially on top of it also.
Exactly.
And which we'll get into at a later time as well. We have another episode planned.
We'll have next-gen AV. We'll have a networking thing, just in case any of this knowledge went over your head on the networking side. We definitely will have a video on that, so y'all can understand what we're talking about whenever we talk about these things. And essentially, it's all a learning experience.
Yeah,
it's all Googleable, but we're more fun.